Hey guys, this is Zerx What If, and welcome to part 3 of What If Yuji Had Anti-Magic. Continuing where we left off, Kinjaku will be thrilled at the fact that Yuji had another being inside of him exactly like Sukuna. However, whatever or whoever was inside of Yuji at the moment along with Sukuna completely suppressed Sukuna, making it so his power didn't mean anything. He was going to make it so he was going to attempt to unleash Sukuna at the same time, and in doing so, he wanted to see what the King of Curses could potentially do with the newfound body. Mahito had told Kinjaku as much as he could about Yuji's curse technique, saying that it was almost like a direct counter to him, completely cutting off his cursed energy. He couldn't fathom something like that, especially not from Yuji. But at the same time, it wasn't just Yuji. Whatever it was inside of Yuji, that was the major problem. Mahito would tell Kinjaku that it would take an abundant amount of fingers in order for Sukuna to gain control once more. Because if they didn't have that, he wasn't sure if Sukuna would be able to suppress the soul of the other being inside of Yuji. It was just that much powerful. Kinjaku would find it interesting seeing that he had no idea what this thing was or who it was. Someone from the ancient times, someone before Kinjaku. He was nothing but curious and wanted to figure out exactly what and who it was. So he would plan even more for the future. For now at least, his plans would stay exactly the same. They were going to attempt to infiltrate Jujutsu High in order to take Sukuna's fingers and more special grade cursed objects. Kinjaku would then smile, telling Mahito that they have a lot going for them, and that in the near future, things will go especially well for them. As we cut back to the Jujutsu sorcerers, Gojo would be explaining to the freshmen that they were going to be participating in the Kyoto Goodwill event, telling them about how they were going to go against the Kyoto school. It was nothing more than just a friendly rivalry. Gojo would laugh and tell the trio that he couldn't wait to show the school how much better his students were than theirs, as Gojo would then introduce the upperclassmen to the younger ones. He would tell them that for the next month and a half, they will be training relentlessly, and that he was going to do specific training with Yuji as well. Megumi would get upset, however, asking Gojo why is Yuji exactly getting special treatment. Gojo would say that Yuji wasn't getting special treatment. It was the fact that Yuji's ability was able to completely counter Gojo's, as Megumi and all the other students would be shocked hearing that. He would proceed to tell them that Yuji is pretty much the only person he's ever known, besides one other man, to be able to get past his technique. They would all begin staring at Yuji, as Yuji would begin to let off a nervous laugh. He wasn't much for the spotlight. However, they would then begin to ask questions about Yuji's technique and what exactly it was. Yuji would then call out to the Shikigami, summoning the grimoire, as all of them would look creeped out. It was simply just a floating book that would fly around Yuji. Megumi would be confused, asking what the hell that was. It came completely out of thin air, as if it's sitting there invisible waiting for Yuji to call onto it. Yuji would say that was pretty much what was happening. However, at the same time, Yuji would think about the blade that he had first drawn, as the grimoire would immediately begin spitting it out. Yuji would say that he could do something like this, as he would grab the sword from the grimoire, as a large black blade would fall onto Yuji's hand, stabbing it into the ground. He would say that the blade was kind of heavy. However, it was nothing that a ton of training couldn't help. Gojo would then laugh, telling Yuji that then it's a good thing that they have a month and a half to prepare. For the entire training period, Gojo was going to drill as much as he could into his students, Yuji especially. He wanted to see how Yuji's technique interacted with him more, someone that was finally able to touch him. It was getting exciting for Gojo as well. The new generation of sorcerers, the ones he wants to protect in order for the world to prosper. Some of them very well may be on the road to surpass him, as he would look at Yuji and simply smile. He would clench his fist in his hand, asking the group if they were ready, as the freshmen and the upperclassmen would begin training together. For the entire month and a half, they would do nothing but attempt to figure out different ways to use their techniques. Megumi would figure out that he could dive within his shadow. Megumi would continuously push himself, attempting to get on the same level as Yuji, as he could tell, even though Yuji was just starting off as a sorcerer, his growth rate was astounding. With a teacher like Gojo to show him exactly what weaknesses he has, there was no way that Yuji wouldn't be on the same level as Megumi, if not even a little higher. With Yuji's training being nothing but combat training with Gojo, Gojo knew that Yuji's ability was able to disable all types of cursed energy. However, he couldn't rely on that only. Sometimes, an opponent would simply be way stronger than him, leaving Yuji to be unable to do anything at all. Therefore, he was going to teach Yuji how to make openings for himself. He would push Yuji to an entirely different level, as Yuji understood that his cursed technique and cursed energy trait negates cursed energy. However, Even if he were to negate something like Gojo's infinity, every time he would try to strike him, he would simply get outclassed in hand-to-hand combat, being put on his back numerous times. The blade he used was hard to swing around. Even though Yuji was insanely strong for his own standards, swinging a blade like that wasn't worthwhile in a fight. He had tons of openings, and on top of that, if his opponent fights at long range and Yuji wasn't able to get close range, Yuji would be completely useless. He could take someone like Megami. Going against him, if Megami decides to simply fight from range, he could beat Yuji outright, and Megami knows this. However, at the same time, if Yuji were to close the distance between himself and Megami, Megami would stand no chance at all. Yuji for the whole month will have to figure out how to work around this weakness. Yuji would think to himself day and night. He wasn't sure what he could do about the weakness. He would train himself every day with Megami, Gojo, and Nobara, and with the upperclassmen as well. Maki was best fit for teaching him how to use his weapons. Panda was fit on teaching Yuji on how to use more defense, as Inumaki didn't really want to strain himself before the tournament. Megami would train against Yuji, teaching him how to close the distance from someone who fights from a range, as Yuji would do the opposite for Megami, teaching him how to fight more effectively close range, using his Shikigami more and having better combos with him. They would also do this joint training with Nobara, since she was more of a range fighter as well. Even though she could fight up close with her hammer, Yuji was simply outclassing her, so she would effectively try to get on his level, training with Maki and both Yuji, as Gojo would simply teach the group about cursed energy control and how to control their cursed energy better. By the end of the month and a half, Yuji was a completely different person than he was before. Before the training, Yuji's energy would almost spill out all over the place, but now, Yuji was able to completely control it, as during the last week of training, something would happen, as Yuji would be training with Gojo. As one day, when Yuji and Gojo were training, Gojo would hit Yuji a little too hard, knocking him out. As Yuji would wake up inside an innate domain, he would be confused, asking himself what's going on exactly, as a man covered in shadows would come out, telling Yuji that it's a pleasure to officially meet him. He would tell Yuji that he could have called him this entire time, however, he simply wanted Yuji to live a normal life. It wasn't fair for someone like him to take over Yuji's conscience, even though he could have done it. He would introduce himself as Liebe, telling Yuji that he's already had a turn at life and he wasn't going to take that from Yuji. As much as he wishes to kill every last curse that stands in front of Yuji's way, it's Yuji's life and not his. It's why he's been keeping Sukuna under wraps. However, Sukuna himself is ridiculously strong. Even though they only have one finger's worth of Sukuna inside, his soul is incredibly powerful. He would continue talking, telling Yuji that it's not as if it's hard to keep Sukuna under control. It's just that if he wants Liebe to keep control over Sukuna, he would need him to gradually eat the fingers and not shove them all down in one full sitting. He wants Yuji to live a peaceful life, living the life that he wants. He understands Yuji's hatred for cursed spirits, and he wants them gone just as much as Yuji wants them gone. They took something important from Liebe, and he couldn't take back control when he was alive. However, given this second chance, he was going to help Yuji take back what's his, trying to do exactly what's right, giving Yuji an actual chance at life. Yuji would smile, telling Liebe that he thanks him. He's pretty sure he would have died at the juvenile detention center if it wasn't for Liebe. He's pretty sure Sukuna would have taken over his life and ruined it by now. He's pretty sure that going against Mahito, he doesn't know what would have happened if Liebe wasn't there. Liebe would simply let off a sinister smile, as he would tell Yuji that as long as he lives inside of Yuji, he would do everything in his power to protect Yuji, even if that means sacrificing everything he has for him. He has watched Yuji's progress and is glad that Yuji is actually getting stronger. He wants Yuji to believe in himself, because he has the power to do whatever he wants. Yuji would then ask Liebe, what exactly does he mean by that? Liebe would simply tell Yuji to call on to the grimoire, and it will give him exactly what he desires. He would tell Yuji to not be afraid, that Liebe is on his side. As Yuji would wake up, he would be confused. What exactly did Liebe mean? He would accidentally say the name out loud, as Gojo would hear him. However, he would only take the name and keep it in the back of his head for now. He would ask Yuji if he was okay, as Yuji would tell Gojo that he was absolutely fine. Actually, he felt even better. It would seem that even though he didn't fully accept Liebe, due to him believing Liebe was something like another Sukuna inside of him. However, all this time, Liebe has been doing nothing but helping Yuji, and after that talk, he couldn't help but come to trust Liebe. Even though it was going to start off small, it was still something, and in doing that unknowingly, Yuji would open his soul more to Liebe as it would link them together. Even though it would start off as a small link, their souls would be more entwined than they already was, giving Yuji access to more of Liebe's cursed energy, as Gojo would tell Yuji to simply get rest and they'll resume training tomorrow. As the next day would come about, everything would go on as normal with the students training, with only a couple of days left before the Goodwill event. As Yuji would be training with Gojo once more, he was attempting to close the distance on Gojo. As he would rush in, swinging his sword down, Yuji could feel it. The weight of the blade wasn't as heavy as it used to be. Swinging the blade was so much easier, as even faster strikes than usual would attempt to crash down onto Gojo. Gojo would notice this, telling Yuji that his swings have gotten faster and stronger, and he's proud of him, as he would knock Yuji back, taunting Yuji once more. However, just then, the Grimoire would appear without Yuji saying anything. As Yuji would be confused, it would then call onto the sword that Yuji had in his hands at the moment, sucking it back into the Grimoire. As Yuji would be confused, telling the book that he was training and that he needs a weapon. As the book would then begin to open to another page, writing would begin to appear on the book, as at the same time, information would flow inside of Yuji's head. Yuji would then begin to smile. He couldn't believe it at all. Something like this was exactly what he needed. This entire training period was to make up for the lack of range that Yuji has. However, with this, he would call onto the book and begin pulling out a sword. It would be completely different from his other one. Being not even half the size of the first sword, Yuji would pull out the sword, as it would be a simple short blade sword, completely dark in color. As Yuji would hold onto it with one hand, as Gojo would raise an eyebrow asking Yuji what was that. Yuji would simply smile, telling Gojo that he wants to try something. Gojo would tell Yuji to go for it, as Yuji would slice horizontally. At the same time he would slice, a projected slash of anti-magic would fly through the sky, heading straight towards Gojo. Gojo would smile, seeing the slash, telling Yuji that he was incredible. Gojo had no choice but to dodge this slash, seeing as it would have went straight through his infinity and maybe straight through him. He would laugh at Yuji and tell him that he was incredible for figuring out something like that so soon. Making up for his lack of range, he now has a new sword. Gojo would tell Yuji that they only have a couple of days left. However, he's going to drill whatever he can inside of Yuji's head. He's going to make sure Yuji is absolutely ready. He wants Yuji to show the Kyoto school that he isn't just Sukuna's vessel, and that he's his own sorcerer in his own right. As the week would eventually come to an end, the Kyoto Goodwill event will come to introduce itself, with everyone being a lot stronger than they originally were, pushing themselves to their limits, hoping to become as strong as they possibly can, but really because Gojo simply wanted to show off his students. Each school would introduce themselves to one another, as they would all go back to their designated starting areas, where Principal Gakuganji would still announce that they were going to try an attempt at Itadori's head. He was still considered the vessel of Sukuna, even though Sukuna hasn't veered his head since the first time Yuji took place at Jujutsu High School. He knows Itadori is simply too dangerous to leave alive. They know all about Itadori's curse technique and his cursed energy. It's not something that the higher-ups agree with. It's too unconventional. Someone that could just completely negate cursed energy in its own was seen as an anomaly. Not only did the higher-ups disagree with Itadori being who he is as a person, but the fact that he was Sukuna's vessel was a cherry on top for them. They couldn't deal with that. Both of those things would make it so Gakuganji would tell his students that they were going to attempt to kill Itadori Yuji, based on the fact that he was simply way too dangerous to keep alive. He would convince them by telling them, if Sukuna were to awaken, and he got a hold of Yuji's anti-magic technique, who knows what could happen to any of them. He would negate every last one of their curse techniques and what they have. However, Toto being Toto would tell the group that he won't indulge in whatever the hell they have going on. He would tell them to stay out of his way, and that he was going to size up the kid himself, and if any of them got in his way, he was going to kill them. The Tokyo school would plan out what they were going to do, with most of them saying that they were going to take out as many cursed spirits as they can so they can gain as many points. However, if anyone were to get in their way, they want them to show them the fruits of their training. And if Toto were to get involved, they want Yuji to be the person to distract him, seeing as he was the strongest out of all of them and could probably take Toto head on. Yuji would agree with this, seeing that the group would say Toto would more than likely immediately appear, wanting to have a fight, and that it was simply going to be Itadori's job to hold him off until they could gather as many points as they could. They would formulate their plan and play onto it to perfection. As they would all nod, they would then get into place as the event was about to start. As the bell would toll, the Goodwill event would have officially started, as the Tokyo students would tell each other to stay true to their plans. With Toto coming in exactly how they had planned, with Itadori starting off with a strong knee to his face. However, this knee was stronger than Toto expected it to be. Instead of him taking it on head first, it would blast him back into a tree. As Toto would smile, he would tell Yuji that that kick had a lot more to it than he thought it was going to have. It was able to push him back that far. He was kind of impressed, but before anything else would happen, Toto would laugh and tell Yuji that he needs to ask him a question before they start anything. He would ask Yuji, what kind of girls does he like? As Yuji would give his same answer, he likes a tall girl with a nice ass. As Toto would immediately start crying, he would then stare down back at Yuji, calling him his brother, saying that he can't believe that people want him dead. He was simply too amazing for that. Yuji would be confused, asking Toto what the hell he was talking about, and why did he call him his brother. Toto would tell Yuji to not worry about it and simply get into the groove of fighting, as he would rush towards Yuji once more, throwing a haymaker towards Yuji's face. Yuji would block this, however, quite easily, sweeping for Toto's legs. As Toto could see this, he would strengthen his footing. However, Yuji would surprise him with his strength once more. As the leg sweep would catch his legs, it would cause Toto to fall over. Toto would then laugh, saying that he didn't expect to have to use this early, but he thinks he has to. He would grab onto a rock as he was falling, throwing it up into the sky and fusing it with cursed energy. He would then clap as Yuji was attempting to follow up on his attack. However, he would hit nothing but the ground as Toto would fall down, slamming his foot onto the back of Yuji's head, slamming his head into the ground. This would catch Yuji off guard completely, as he would immediately try to turn around, catching Toto once more. However, Toto would clap again, switching himself with Yuji, as he would send a kick straight towards Yuji's gut. Yuji, still being in a curled position, would have no choice but to take the attack head on. It would connect to his gut, sending him flying into a bundle of trees. He would catch himself by swinging off one of the branches and jumping back towards Toto. However, he would then see an arrow fly at him, attempting to strike him straight in the chest. Yuji would simply sidestep out of the way, dodging the arrow completely. As just then, Mai would attempt to shoot Yuji point blank range, with Yuji almost being caught off guard by this. He would just barely roll underneath it, as he would now realize what Toto actually meant. People were actually trying to kill him. As not paying attention, Miwa would be behind him, using her new shadow style simple domain. Yuji would accidentally roll into the circle. However, just as he would see Miwa draw her blade, he would call onto his grimoire, calling onto his first blade, as the blade would drop down into the simple domain, breaking the simple domain, causing Miwa to faceplant face first into the flat side of Yuji's blade. Yuji would then look up and realize that he was completely surrounded. The entire Kyoto school wasn't even trying to get points during this event. They were only trying to kill him. He would simply look up and ask them why. What's the reason? Kamo would then tell Yuji that the only reason they're here to kill him is simply because he's the vessel of Sukuna. He's too dangerous to be left alive. Yuji would be about to say something else, however, a mouth would then appear on Yuji's cheek. It would scream out, telling the group that they are all disgraceful. Sukuna is nothing more than a bug, and he refuses to have Yuji die over the fact that a bug is inside of his body. He would scream out to the group that Yuji is protected by someone who wishes no harm on anybody but cursed spirits. However, if they dare to make a move on Yuji, Liebe will protect his peace. Every single Kyoto student there could feel Liebe's presence. It was dark and strong. However, there was no malice behind it. It was someone who had an abundant amount of power. However, they weren't necessarily evil. But before anybody else could get another word in, Toto would lunge forward, slamming down to where Kamo was. Kamo would dodge out of the way. However, Toto would tell the group that he thought he told them to not intervene with their fight, and that if they did, he was going to kill them. Kamo would stare at Yuji, then back at Toto, letting off a huge sigh. He would then tell Yuji that he simply got lucky today. Whatever that is inside of you is still not safe for anybody, so he wants Yuji to stop pretending like he's some hero. He would tell Yuji that he's still the vessel of Sukuna, so he shouldn't act like he's some high and mighty hero. He might be in control now, but later, when something happens and Yuji doesn't have control, what is he going to do? Toto would then speak up, telling Kamo that he thought he told him to leave, as Kamo would simply roll his eyes, telling the other Kyoto students that they were going to take their leave and finish the Goodwill event, as Toto would tell Yuji that they were going to finish their battle now, with no more interruptions. The Kyoto event would pretty much go on as regular, with the Tokyo students having a much easier time due to the fact that they've been training themselves for this exact moment, with Gojo himself pushing them. Until eventually, the teachers would notice that every single one of the tags would go up in flames. They would all be confused, wondering exactly what just happened, until eventually they would realize someone had infiltrated the event. The teachers would attempt to rush over, as they would see a veil falling over the event. However, it would close just before they got there. Gojo would be the first to try to enter, however, it would push him back, as he would laugh, thinking that they got them. However, the other teachers would be able to go in and out of it freely, which would mean this barrier was specifically designed in order to stop Gojo himself from entering. Gojo would laugh, however, he wouldn't think much of this. He would just smile and say that he believes in his students, even if he isn't able to get inside. As the students would be midway into their battles, Hanami would appear, and going after Inumaki, Kamo, Megami, and Maki. However, Hanami would appear to be too much for the 4 students, even though they had gotten stronger in their own right. Maki and Megami weren't enough for Hanami. They would have taken a few injuries fighting Hanami, however, just in the nick of time, both Yuji and Todo would jump in, saving both Megami and Maki just in the nick of time. Todo would then stand to the side and tell Yuji that he will not help him until he lands a black flash, and if he dies before that, then so be it. He will simply take care of the special grade curse by himself. He would also tell Yuji that he's not allowed to use his blades either. During their battle, he had noticed Yuji relies on his blades a lot, but he would tell Yuji that there will be a time where Yuji won't be able to use his blades at all, and then what will he do? Until he can land a black flash, he is unable to use his weapons or have help from Todo at all. Yuji would then stare at Hanami and ask her, seeing as you've been so bold to come into this event knowing exactly who is here, you must be working with other people. And if that's the case, are you working with a patch-face-like cursed spirit? Hanami would reply to Yuji with another question, asking him, so what if she was? Yuji would then kick up the earth, throwing a few pieces of stone at Hanami, as Hanami would be forced to dodge out of the way, even though they were only stones. In that quick moment, Yuji took a note from Todo's book, imbuing the stones with his own cursed energy, and Hanami already knows about Yuji and what his cursed energy could do, so she would try to avoid as much as possible to get attacked by Yuji. However, as the dust would settle, Yuji would be gone, as Hanami would look around, confused on where he went, as Yuji from behind Hanami would tell her, if you are, then you will die, as he would throw a punch straight towards Hanami's back. As it would connect, it would blow Hanami forwards, sending her into a couple of trees, and even though the attack wasn't a black flash, it had dealt an immense amount of damage due to Yuji's cursed energy trait. Being made completely of cursed energy and having someone who negates cursed energy attack you wasn't the best feeling in the world. It was only one attack, however. Each attack was deadly. Todo would then walk over to Yuji, putting his hands on both of his shoulders, as he would tell Yuji that he simply needs to concentrate. He understands that Yuji might be angry, but he cannot let that anger take over. However, Yuji would then say something interesting to Todo. He would tell him that he believes it's not just his own anger. However, he knows he'll be able to land a black flash next time. As Yuji would completely concentrate, he would stare down at Hanami, seemingly staring right into her soul. He would rush forward as Hanami would prepare herself to defend, attempting to use her curse technique, bringing up tree branches, attempting to block Yuji's pathway. However, Yuji would simply break straight through them, getting right in front of Hanami. As he would cock his fist back, cursed energy charged in hand, he would let his fists fly as the world would begin to distort around him, yelling out the words black flash as it would connect with Hanami's torso. However, surprising both Hanami and Todo. Even though Hanami was somewhat durable, this attack would completely blow off the right side of Hanami's torso, leaving a humongous gaping hole. As Yuji would now be completely in the zone, Hanami would look down terrified, realizing that Yuji wasn't normal at all. Hanami understood that was a black flash, however, it should not have done that much damage to her. She would immediately create space in between both her and Yuji, regenerating the right side of her torso. As she would rip the covering off the left side of her arm, preparing herself to fight to the death. She was going to make sure she killed Yuji for that. She knew that Yuji was Sukuna's vessel, however, he was simply too much of a variable to leave alive. She would immediately say the words domain expansion, shining sea of flowers. It would cover the entire area, capturing both Todo and Yuji inside of the barrier. Todo would immediately use simple domain, as Yuji would immediately rush forward. Hanami would call Yuji an idiot for rushing forward like that, saying that her domain has a sure hit effect. However, surprising Hanami and Todo, nothing would happen at all. Yuji would continue running forward, sprinting straight towards Hanami, as Hanami would be confused. Why was her sure hit effect not working on Yuji? It must have been due to Yuji's cursed energy trait, negating all types of cursed energy. It would make it as if Yuji wasn't able to be targeted by domains at all, negating the sure hit effect of any domain expansion. Hanami knew it. Yuji was absolutely dangerous, as Yuji would continue to rush forward, sprinting straight towards Hanami. Hanami would do everything in her power to stop Yuji. She would have to send attacks at him manually, sending supercharged solar beams straight towards Yuji as he would dodge, moving faster than he's ever moved before. She would attempt to create as much space as possible. However, Yuji was unrelenting in his charge, dodging each move Hanami would send his way, ducking under branches, dodging beams of light, in a state of flow, sprinting straight towards Hanami as he would land in front of her once more. Cocking back his fist, he would rocket his punch straight towards Hanami's head this time, wanting to exercise the curse immediately. Hanami would attempt to block the attack, however, it would shoot straight through her defenses, hitting her directly in the head, as Yuji would land yet another black flash, blowing the curse's head completely off, as the domain expansion would completely collapse, as a second black flash would have exorcised Hanami. Todo would do nothing but smile. He didn't realize it at all, but Yuji was a force to be reckoned with. His cursed energy trait goes directly against what cursed spirits are made of entirely. Being made of completely cursed energy and having someone that negates that attack you must feel like hell, as Yuji would simply look down at his hands, grasping them, as he would smile. All that training wasn't for nothing. He has gotten significantly stronger, and I think that's where I'm going to end it off here. Don't worry guys, Yuji will not be super OP in this one. The only reason he killed Hanami in those 2 hits were simply because they were both black flashes, as well as Yuji's cursed energy trait. Just imagine being made of cursed energy, and then something that negates cursed energy attacking you. It's like a shockwave going throughout your entire body, shutting down every single one of your functions. However, I hope you guys enjoyed. Thank you for listening. Thank you for the support. And yeah, I'll continue to try to keep up with the schedule, continue posting. And yeah, thank you. Peace.